in addition to all of this, we've altered. We used to store, for those that have worked in 1.6.5, 1.7, even previous versions of dotCMS, you're familiar with what our inodes and our identifiers, and these were all numbers, which are easy to work with and nice, but one of the weaknesses of it is if I were to try to get a bunch of content from one system or a bunch of files from a system and just move the data over to a new system, that was difficult because my number 153 may be different in your database. Your number 153 may be a piece of content where mine is a file. Well, with UUID, these things are unique, and data could now be moved safely from one dotCMS database to another one without worry of collision. And this is going to make, not in 1.9, but in 2.0, a full push publishing model, taking content, files, and so forth from one server, pushing them to another server in a totally another location, or just getting a specific host or just a folder and then downloading that guy and importing him into another guy. This is what was needed for that. But even in 1.9, through a plugin, it would be more than possible. It would definitely possible for a developer to get in and be able to create tooling that would move content, move files, move pieces from one place to another. And then lots of other things to show off that we could go to. Let me show you. We have a little bit of a nicer query syntax in dotCMS now. And if you look here, let's search for news, and we have 2 results. Now, if we click and show query here, you notice we say plus structure name, right? This is our Lucene query syntax. For those that have worked here, is news item. And then we say news item dot headline, :news. Now, if you remember, a lot of times you had to go back in the structure, you had to find the index name, and this would be something like text2. In this respect, it makes a lot more sense, much more easier to read. We've also added a kind of a test page for admins where if you need to execute Lucene queries directly and get some results of that, you can now do that. We have kind of a query test page built for helping you build that out. Lots of other improvements. These are just a few. I wouldn't even say they're the core improvements, but as you've seen with the roles and the permissions, the form builder, and some of the underneath technical pieces that we talked about, these are just really a few of the pieces that we have that are in 1.9 that are pretty big.
Well, Jason, some of the questions that have come in were concerned with LDAP groups. One of the questions that came in before the webinar was, what will clients need to do to migrate LDAP groups to roles if there's been this shift from groups to roles whenever they upgrade to dotCMS 1.9? Will they need to build a role for each group that they have already in their dotCMS?
Great. Actually, that's a great question. The way that it used to work is LDAP would come over and you'd have a group configured in LDAP, and in dotCMS, groups were a collection of roles. But in the old dotCMS, roles were not hierarchical, neither were groups. The only hierarchy that existed is you had a group which under it had many roles. At this point, what it is we directly map a group to a role. The problem is that you could have a template manager here at this level. Yeah, you couldn't have a second template manager at the same level, but say under system here, you could have a template manager because that's same name but at a different level. These work similar to categories though. You could edit this role, and by editing the role, you can provide a key. So to provide LDAP matching, the way that we've solved this is you provide a key here, and by providing this key, that will map to the LDAP group. So if you needed someone to be in a role that's higher up or lower in the chain, all you have to do is reference it by key. Those keys are unique. Each role in the system, even if you have 1,000 roles, if you give each of them a key, now again the key is optional, but if you give each of them a key, then they all have to be different. That key maps directly to an LDAP group.
Thank you, JT. There's a couple questions I think here we can group together. When will a 1.9 release candidate be available, and will there be an EXE for 1.9?
There will definitely be an EXE for 1.9, and as far as the release candidate, we're working here in the next couple of weeks. We should see we released kind of a preview release or a developer release a number of weeks ago here. We'll see something similar to that, and then followed by a release candidate coming out here within the next short while.
Another question here, is there a way to create a form specifically for a host or to permission a form to a single host?
Yes. No, the forms themselves, and I'm assuming we're talking here about the new form builder. As we saw under the permissions, you would be able to add the permission on that form so that a user who only has permissions to a particular host would would only be able to use it or would be able to pull it in that way. And there are a lot of permissions that do right now kind of affect on the host. Where you have host permissions and they come in, and if you're not on the right host, it doesn't pull that particular content or that file. And pretty much anything that you could do on the form, anything you could do in the file, they're all the same. The permissions work like they used to work in dotCMS in that respect, in that whatever permissions you can put on a file, you can put on a piece of content, they're all, the permissions tab is fairly consistent between the objects.
Yeah, there's a lot of great questions that came in on the form builder. We'll get to a few more of those in a minute. I see there's a lot of great questions that came in about the new features for multiple host management. JT, can you tell us? There's someone that asked, they saw that containers and templates were host dependent, but they didn't see that content was. Is that a design decision? Were they looking at it correctly?
Right. I'm really glad that we got a lot of questions here on the multi-site manager. One of the real focuses with 1.9 was, what if I want to run 1,000 hosts? I want to run a lot of hosts, different permissions. We've tried to make not only from the permissions but the host management itself. There's whole tooling. For those that haven't seen it yet, there's entire tooling built around creating a host, and you can right-click on these guys, stop a host, so you can start a host, run the host. The host itself works like content now, so it can have its own variables, and you can utilize those. And you can also copy a host. If you go to add a host here now, you can start with a blank host, which is just like create a new host, or you can copy from an existing host, and it'll take that whole host and copy its templates, containers. You actually get options here on who do you want to copy from, and what exactly do you want to copy. So the question was, as Dean, and I just wanted to mention that because we didn't look at it before, and I know we have a number of questions here with it. The question was that containers and templates are host dependent, which is true. You can search for ones on all hosts, but they are host specific. Content is not, and that is definitely a design decision. It's always been that you can have many hosts, say mycollege.edu, and then I can have my athletics.mycollege.edu, department.a.mycollege.edu. And in this respect, a lot of times they need to share content. They share hosts, or they share templates, containers, content. You could still do that, and we didn't want to remove any of that. And for content, it doesn't have to live on a host. It is an option if you want it to live in a host. You can add a host or file field in the structure, and you can make the content be restricted to a certain host, or you can make it so it can live on any host or just in a specific folder.